Welcome to Annotations for Validations. After watching this video, you will be able to use Java Bean validation annotations for enforcing constraints on data, use Spring-specific validation options, such as the validator interface and data binder, handle validation errors effectively in REST APIs, and identify best practices for implementing validations in a real-world application. Data validation ensures that processed data meets essential accuracy and reliability standards. It is essential for building secure, reliable, and user-friendly applications. Without proper validation, your application risks invalid or malicious data, causing crashes, security breaches, or unexpected behavior. This video explores the Bean Validation API, JSR 380, and Spring-specific validation mechanisms. You will understand how to enforce data integrity with built-in annotations, handle validation errors, and implement custom validation for advanced use cases. Let's begin by understanding the Bean Validation API, JSR 380. The Bean Validation API, JSR 380, defines a standard way for validating Java objects. It provides annotations for defining validation rules for Java application fields, methods, or classes. It integrates seamlessly with frameworks such as Spring Boot, JPA, and REST APIs to enforce data integrity. Let's explore some common built-in Java Bean validation annotations and their use cases. The not null annotation ensures that a field is not null. It prevents null values for mandatory fields such as email or password. The size annotation ensures that a string or collection has a specific size range. It enforces username or password length requirements. The min and max annotations enforce numerical range constraints. The pattern annotation validates a field against a regular expression. The email annotation validates whether a field follows the correct email format. Now that you know the core Java annotations, let's learn how to apply them to a JPA entity. The not null annotation on the title ensures the title cannot be null. The same applies to the author attribute. The size annotation restricts the title to a length between 2 and 100 characters. The min annotation ensures the price is at least 1. Although the Bean Validation API JSR 380 provides a robust way to handle validation through annotations, Spring Framework extends these capabilities with its Spring-specific validation options. These tools allow for more customization and flexibility, especially for scenarios where annotations might not suffice or field-level validations are insufficient. The validator interface in Spring provides a programmatic way to implement custom validation logic. It is particularly useful in the following situations. You need to validate fields that depend on other fields. For example, cross-field validations. Annotations cannot express the more complex validation logic required, or you want full control over the validation process. The first step is to import the required packages. The validator class is the core of Spring's validation framework. It allows us to implement custom validation logic for any object. The errors class is used to store and retrieve validation errors during validation processing. The validation utils class is used to automatically check for empty fields and adds errors if a field is blank or null. The implements validator class implements the validator interface, which requires defining two methods, supports and validate. The supports method takes in a class type as an input parameter and returns true only if the given class is book.class. The validate method contains the validation rules. It first converts the target object into a book and then checks if the price is less than 1. If true, it returns an error message stating that the price has to be greater than 0. The validation utils class is used to check if the title is empty or contains only spaces. This ensures the caller does not send an empty title or blank string. The validator interface can be integrated into Spring controllers to validate user input dynamically. The controller annotation marks this class as a Spring MVC controller, allowing it to handle HTTP requests. The book validator object, created previously, manually validates book objects before processing them. It calls the validate method from book validator to check if the book object meets the defined constraints. This controller ensures that any book added through the addBook endpoint is validated before processing, preventing invalid data from being stored or processed. Result.has errors checks if validation errors exist. If true, it returns error page, indicating validation failed. If false, it proceeds with normal processing and returns success page. The data binder class is a Spring utility that binds input data, say, from an HTTP request to a Java object, and then validates it. It applies a validator to validate the bound object. It captures validation errors in a binding result object. This is especially useful when working with forms or REST APIs. New data binder creates a data binder instance for the book object. DataBinder.setValidator attaches the custom book validator to the data binder. This is the validator you created previously. DataBinder.bind simulates binding input data, such as input from an HTTP request to the book object. DataBinder.validate runs the validation logic defined in the book validator. Result.getAllErrors retrieves all validation errors for further processing. Spring Boot automatically validates REST API requests using the @valid annotation. However, you can use the controller advice annotation to handle validation errors globally. This annotation is a Spring annotation that centralizes exception handling for all controllers. It simplifies error handling by processing exceptions such as method argument not valid exception globally. Let's look at an example. The controller advice annotation designates the class as a centralized exception handler. The exception handler annotation captures specific exceptions. In this case, it captures method argument not valid exception. Method argument not valid exception is thrown when a request body fails validation. Whenever validation fails, this method gets called. The getFieldErrors method retrieves all validation errors from the exception. The forEach statement loops through each validation error, extracts the field name and the error message, and adds them to the errors map. http://status.badRequest returns a 400 bad request status code for invalid requests. Next, let's explore some best practices for validation. Validate at the right layer. Avoid duplicating validation logic across layers for cleaner and more maintainable code. Use built-in annotations first. For common validation needs, leverage standard annotations, such as not null, size, min, and pattern. Centralize error handling. Use @controller advice to handle validation errors globally and ensure consistent error messages across APIs. Write tests. Write unit tests to validate your constraints and custom validators. Validate nested objects. Use @valid on nested objects to ensure the entire object graph is validated. Provide actionable and informative error messages for end users or developers. For example, instead of invalid data, the message must say, price must be greater than 0. In this video, you learned that the Bean Validation API, JSR 380, provides annotations for defining validation rules for Java application fields, methods, or classes. Common built-in Java Bean validation annotations include @notNull, @size, @min, @max, @pattern, and @email. Spring-specific validation options allow for more customization for scenarios where annotations might not suffice or field-level validations are insufficient. The validator interface can be integrated into Spring controllers for validating user input dynamically. The data binder class is a Spring utility that binds input data to a Java object and then validates it. And the controller advice annotation can be used to handle validation errors globally.